It is Sunday, March 27th, 2016, and welcome to the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 24. You gotta have faith. As always, I am your host, Jay Vincent. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Multifarious Man, or follow the podcast and blog at www.multifariousman.com. On today's show, I'm talking about my favorite songs from the 1987 to 1988 school year. So for me, this was a transformative year. Not only was it my first year of high school, my sophomore year in fact, but I was away from home for the first time at something kind of like a boarding school in New Canaan, Connecticut. So this episode is more of a story as I reminisce about the first time I experienced the world through my own eyes without the prism of the protective environment of my parents. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my trip down memory lane.
Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold. All the things I want to say that never been told. Demon Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man.
All right, welcome back to the show. Again, this is the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 24. Now, what am I reading, watching, and listening to this week? First up is a fabulous book by Stephen King, and it's called 11/22/63. Now, that date, if it doesn't sound familiar to you, then you really don't know, American history, at least the last 50 years or so. 11/22/63 was the date that John F. Kennedy, the president of the United States, was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas, Texas. So 11/22/63 by Stephen King is a story about a history professor I can't remember if he really was a history professor, but a professor who somehow meets a man that has a diner, and in that diner, in the pantry, is a wormhole, or a rabbit hole as they call it, that takes him back to 1958. So what does anybody that finds a time machine, what are they going to do? Well, this guy decides, with the help of the diner owner, what if we can stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy? That's a noble cause. So, sure enough, he goes back in time, and because he goes back to 1958, he has a few years to kind of live in the past until the time that he does something or tries to do something to prevent it. Now, this story doesn't really get into the hows or whys of how time travel works. It's not really relevant. What's relevant in this story is, if you could change the past, should you? And what past should you change? Should you change big things? Should you change small things? And what makes one thing more important to the other? Because again, what's important to you may not be important to the next person. And it deals with things like the butterfly effect, which is basically saying, like, if a butterfly flaps its wing in Japan, it causes a tidal wave in California, little things like that. So every little thing that you touch and change can impact many things. So if you're in the past, what do you do? How do you decide, really who lives, who dies? It has some really interesting philosophical touch points, and it's a really wonderful, wonderful read. It's worth taking a shot. It's different than most Stephen King. It's not a horror story. It's not macabre. It is, at its essence, it's a love story. And I really, really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. Stay to the very end. It's worth the ride. Again, 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Next, what am I watching? Well, I was pleased as punch when Netflix last year announced that Daredevil, which was amazing, Marvel's Daredevil, amazing show, that Marvel did in conjunction with Netflix. Last year they did Daredevil, and it was an amazing show. Well, now season 2 is out, and it kind of picks up some time after the events in the first season. Not too long, but long enough. And it introduces 2 characters from the Daredevil universe. Of course, anyone that's ever read Daredevil comics has also heard of Elektra, his girlfriend, another badass fighter. And it kind of gives the backstory of how they met and introduces her into Matt Murdock's world in Hell's Kitchen in New York. And it also brings another fan favorite from that universe, from the Marvel universe, the Punisher. So the season is, it's very violent. And it asks the question is, what drives a man or woman to become a vigilante as it really stands? And what's the difference between one person's methods and the next? What makes one want to kill and one not want to kill? And what's really the difference? And is it, experience? Is it something that you've gone through that leads to making that decision? So consistently throughout this season, and it asks that question, where do you draw the line? And who makes the decision as what determines where that line is? So it's a very interesting, they kind of mixed a couple of different storylines from the comics together, and I think they did an excellent job. I mean, there were some things I felt were heavy-handed and kind of ham-fisted, and maybe 1 or 2 story plots that were kind of mashed together, but on the whole I think they did a really good job. And if you were a fan of season 1, check it out and you'll probably power through it. I mean, it's 13 episodes and they go by. And you'll definitely want more when it's done. And hang around at the end of the final episode. There is a separate, trailer that they have for Luke Cage. So Luke Cage is the next character from this universe that's getting his own show. He was first introduced last year in Jessica Jones, which if you haven't seen it, check that out also. And then that's coming up, I believe, in September. No word yet on when we're going to see Daredevil again, but definitely worth checking out. Last, what am I listening to? Well, what am I listening to is a new album by Gwen Stefani. It's called This Is What the Truth Feels Like. Now, if you've been watching The Voice, or at least last year, or if you've just not been living under a rock, you know that last year Gwen Stefani went through, a very public breakup with her husband, Gavin Rossdale, of 12 years. There was infidelity with a nanny, whole bunch of nonsense. This album is kind of like her heartache album, find new love album, because now she's in a relationship with what's the guy, the country guy, and I'm drawing a blank. It'll come back to me later, but he's on the Voice also. But needless to say, it is a wonderful album. If you're a fan of Gwen from her No Doubt days, or even if you're a fan of some of her solo projects, it's not a sad album. It's a powerful album. She talks about love. She talks about friendship. She talks about heartache. And her typical voice. She has a really unique sound and tone, and it really suits her well. Definitely check out the album. I really enjoy it. And it's, one of the latest that's going to be on, repeat. And there's definitely some really good cuts on there that I'm going to add to my typical No Doubt playlist. So, again, that's Gwen Stefani. This Is What the Truth Feels Like. Now, that's it for what I'm reading, watching, and listening to. And when I come back, it's time to take a trip back to 1987, 1988. So when I come back, that's what we're going to talk about. 1987 and 1988 school year and the top songs that I was listening to back then. All right, welcome back to the show. Again, this is the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 24. You gotta have faith. Now, like I said in the intro, 1987. Well, that was a strange year for me. It started off with unexpected sorrow when a close friend of mine died in a motorcycle accident. Now, I was barely 13 and in the final semester of my senior year for middle school. And in New York, it was, junior high school, middle school, junior high school. It was, grades 7th and 8th. Until that point, the only funerals I'd ever been to were those of older relatives and elderly members of the church. So nothing had ever hit so close to home. So on the afternoon of that late winter funeral, I found myself on a Metro North train platform in the Bronx, bound for New Canaan, Connecticut. I was on my way to visit and interview for a spot in the ABC program, stands for A Better Chance, to attend New Canaan High School in fall of that same year, so fall of 87. And I remember not wanting to leave that day as we mourned the loss of a friend that I considered my big brother. And my parents, they left the decision to me as to whether I would keep my commitment and go on that scheduled visit or request a future date. And I didn't know if I was running away from something or running to something back then. I mean, what 13-year-old boy is that introspective anyway? But I chose to take the train ride. And 7 months later, I was moving into kind of like a boarding house, sharing a room with two other young men from New York City as we prepared to begin our sophomore year in high school. It also happened that my first year of high school, thanks to an accelerated junior high school program, was my first year of high school. Now, my prized possessions were a JVC dual cassette boombox with a 3-band graphic equalizer and a detachable wired speakers. This was the backdrop of a musical journey that would dramatically expand my horizons. Now, Madonna's True Blue and George Michael's Faith were the two albums that I owned. The former, I made a cassette copy from the vinyl LP, and the latter, I just owned the album on cassette. Beyond that, I had a collection of pause mix cassettes that I recorded from the daily countdowns on 107.5 WBLS and 98.7 KISS FM. Before the school year was over, I would be introduced to NXS, U2, Whitesnake, and a host of other rock and pop acts outside of the realm of rap and R&B and urban contemporary. So today's list of songs are a veritable cornucopia of the Billboard top hits from 1987 and 1988. First up on my list is Lean On Me by Club Nouveau. Now, this, of course, was a remake, but not relevant. My cousin called one of the local radio stations in New York and had this song dedicated to our friend that had passed. And I just remember the first time I heard it. This was, winter, early spring of 87. I cried when I heard this song. And still to this day, I remember the first time I heard it in my parents' house, sitting in the dining room with my cousins listening to this song. And I still love it to this day. Don't hear it that often, but when I do, it brings back, kind of bittersweet memories. Lean On Me. Next up is Need You Tonight by NXS. Now, I heard this for the first time in the dressing room in the theater department at New Canaan High School while I was waiting for my old man makeup, which turned out it was just a little bit of makeup to darken under my eyes and some white shoe polish. Apparently, white shoe polish is good for making your hair look gray and older. I was playing Uncle Smellicue in the fall production of Dark of the Moon. This song still gets me hype. One of the guys, a senior, who was one of the stars of the play, had this on his radio and played it. I'd never heard it before. Fantastic song. So for me, before this, Prince, Elvis, the Beatles, NXS and Need You Tonight kind of opened up, my eyes to many more songs that I would listen to going on after that. Next on the list, Manic Monday by the Bangles. Now, one of our 2 live-in tutors that stayed with us at the ABC house owned this album on CD, and he would let me listen to it. Most people would probably say they like Walk Like an Egyptian as their favorite from the Bangles, A Different Light album, but not for me. This was the one, Manic Monday. And it turns out the song was actually written by Prince under the pseudonym Christopher. Little known fact. So Manic Monday by the Bangles from their A Different Light album. Next on the list, Here I Go Again by Whitesnake. I have 2 words, Tawny Katane. If you were a teenage boy and you ever saw this video, you know what I mean. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Next up, Moni Moni by Billy Idol. Now, they played this song over and over again at a party that I went to during a mock UN trip. And if anyone's ever done one of these trips, basically, kids from different schools get together and you're basically assigned a country. And you just kind of have a mock UN. It's really interesting. You get to learn about different people, different places, and you get pretty much it's an excuse for teenagers to go on a trip for education. But again, this was the song that they played at the party, one of the parties we went to. And, if you were a teenager when this song was out, then the provocative call and response chant that you shouted when this song was played. This is an explicit show, so I won't mention it. But if you grew up in the mid to late 80s, you know what it is. Next on the list, well, how can you have a list from 87 without Michael Jackson? So for me, the song I chose, which I could have pretty much chose anything from Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel. Now, during the time I lived in New Canaan, the president or CEO of Pepsi Cola and his family lived in New Canaan, and he donated tickets for us to see Michael Jackson's Bad tour at Madison Square Garden. To this day, this is still my favorite concert experience of all time. And to make it even better, the model from the Way You Make Me Feel video, she was there. She walked out on stage when they played this song. Me and my friends lost our minds. This song still, great song, great concert, so great memories. Starting off with You Want to Be Starting Something, to when they played Bad, and and they said Bad, who's bad on the big screens, and this is just fantastic concert, great songs, loved it. The Way You Make Me Feel. Next on the list, we have I Want to Be Your Man by Zapp featuring Roger Troutman. Now, Roger Troutman would sing through like a voice box and, kind of high-pitched sounds, but really interesting regardless. And the story behind this one is me and a couple of the guys from the ABC house were invited to a party at an all-girls school in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was 13. How could I not go? And I had my first real slow dance to this song with a really cute girl from the Bronx. And I remember it vividly. So, for me, this was my first real boy-girl dance. And slow dance at that. So this song just will always, have a special place. Next on the list, I've had The Time of My Life by Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes. Now, this was a hit song from a hit soundtrack from the movie Dirty Dancing. Now, this is a movie that no one wants to ever admit that they saw, but everyone seemed to know the songs and be able to quote the movie. And that was back then. Now, I don't know anyone that's embarrassed to say that they love Dirty Dancing. And in fact, they've brought the song back recently on I think like an insurance commercial. But this song was played all over and over again. It's actually a close 1 and 2 with She's Like the Wind by Patrick Swayze. Yeah, I know. It's a cheesy song. But hey, it's a wonderful soundtrack. great movie, and I just love this song. And I'm also a big fan of the Righteous Brothers, where Bill Medley is from. Don't know where Jennifer Warnes is from, and I don't know if she's ever done anything since, but you don't really need to have anything else in this, because this was, this was like the hit. Next up, La Isla Bonita by Madonna. And this was from her True Blue album, which I mentioned in the opening is, one of my 2 albums that I owned. Now, I loved all the songs from Madonna's True Blue album, including, Papa Don't Preach, with that wonderful violin intro. And because I had made a cassette copy of the album, I listened to all the songs in order over and over again. It's not like today where you have a CD and you can kind of just skip ahead and you knew what number the song was. Back in those days, you just knew what song came before and what song came after. There was no skipping. You listened to the song from beginning to end, and you just let the album play. So for me, I guess La Isla Bonita kind of became my favorite because it just so happened to be the one I could play on my Casio keyboard. It was a cool Casio keyboard. I really couldn't play it much, but it had drum pads on it, and I could bang out some music on it. This song I could play, La Isla Bonita. Now, finally, the last song I'm going to talk about is Faith by George Michael. Now, I could probably pick 5, 6, 7 songs from this album because it really is my favorite album from that time. But from the opening organ chords that were a callback to Wham's Freedom from the Make It Big album. So, that was the group that George Michael was in before he went solo. To the frantic acoustic guitar strumming from in this song. You knew you were in for something different. And the title song of George Michael's solo debut, it just grabbed you by the throat, and this album didn't let you go until you had listened to a wonderful mix of rock, dance, and R&B. This album, with its string of hit singles, it commanded the pop and R&B charts for more than a year. It was a phenomenal crossover success. It didn't matter where you were in the country. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they even played this on country music stations, but definitely adult contemporary pop, R&B stations. They played this song on all of them, and everybody loved the songs from this album. And it stayed in one of the dual cassettes in my boombox, and I literally listened to it every single day when I was living in New Canaan. And I guess, overall, I mean, I could probably go on and on of the top hits from the Billboard charts from 87 and 88, even stuff like Breakout from Swing Out Sister. That was a one-hit wonder. I don't know if they did anything since. The song Smokey Sings, I think by the group ABC. Rick Astley, he hit the scene that year. He was this clean-faced, young-looking guy with a deep voice, deep soulful voice. Hits by Expose, hits by Billy Ocean. I think it was just a phenomenal year. And for me, I guess the key for me is, going to school in Connecticut. Growing up in New York, I grew up, I didn't have really any white friends. It just didn't. That's not who I grew up with. It really wasn't even until I went to middle school that I really, was around people of other races and cultures. That's kind of how it is. You grow up and you're around who you know and who you see. That's what you learn. That's what you experience. So for me, it wasn't even about better education. I mean, because the schools in New York City were, pretty good. I mean, education was great. But what was fantastic about going to school in New Canaan was here I was suddenly thrust into a world where, there were a handful of black people that went to school there, and I knew them or I lived with them in the ABC house. But what I found was what it taught me was that people really are the same. Um, teenagers in high school, they pretty much have the same wants and desires. They kind of listen to the same music. Guys, going through puberty, they just want to catch the eye of the cute girl if they're not too embarrassed to say something to her. Everyone just kind of wants to fit in. And what I found going to school in New Canaan was I did fit in. I was just a kid from New York. I was, everybody's little brother, friend, somebody cool. I mean, we laughed at the same things. We liked sports. We liked music. We liked going to parties, hanging out. You find people really aren't different in this world. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, especially in this country. I mean, I can really only speak for this country. So when you think about it, being exposed to different music, that was a benefit. I mean, I probably wouldn't be such a fan of rock music like I am today, or even play guitar if it hadn't gone to school in New Canaan. And it kind of opened up my eyes and, made it easier for me to relate to people and get along with people from any walk of life, because you find when you just take a moment to think about it, strike up a conversation with someone and think about the books they like or the movies they like or the music they like. And you'd be surprised. You probably like a lot of the same things. So I find if you spend more time focusing on the similarities and the things that people have in common, I think you can kind of get past the differences, because the differences really can be minor things, but, we kind of build them up to be major things. So something to think about. But enough, I'm off my soapbox. But sometimes when you go back and you reminisce, you kind of, you just talk about what you know and what you feel. So I'm getting off my soapbox, and enough of that. But I hope you enjoyed some of the songs I talked about today. Maybe it made you think back to your formative years in high school or middle school or college. Think about some of the things you listened to. Do you still listen to some of those things now? I know the songs from this list, some of them I haven't heard in years, but I put together a playlist in advance of this show, and I realized how much I still love those songs and still can sing them, still know all the lyrics. So, don't forget the past. Sometimes there's some gems back there, and it can often shape, where you're going in the future. So that's it for now. When I come back, I will wrap up the show. All right, welcome back to the show. Again, this is the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 24. You gotta have faith. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I enjoyed putting it together. And again, like I said, I put together a playlist, and it grew to like 45 songs. I could probably add another 20 of the songs that I was listening to back in 1987 and 1988. Now, when I was putting together this show, during the past week, two icons from my formative years passed away unexpectedly. They are, of course, Malik Fife Dog Taylor from the groundbreaking hip-hop group Tribe Called Quest, and comedian-actor Gary Shandling. Now, both were talented men that shared their unique gifts with the world. One provided the soundtrack of my high school and college years, and the other made me laugh until my sides hurt. Both were wordsmiths that understood the power of language, and they will both be missed. My condolences go out to their family, friends, and fans. And that's it for this week on the Multifarious Man Podcast. Again, like I always say, why just be various when you can be multifarious? I hope to see you again soon. Again, if you enjoyed the show, leave me a comment on the show notes or directly on the podcast link. You can get it through Stitcher, through Spreaker, and through iTunes. And you'll see the links and notes on the website, www.multifariousman.com. And I'll be adding the show notes shortly after this show being released. Other than that, take care. Peace out.
Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold. All the things I want to say that never been told. Demon Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man.